Imagine a world where the most fundamental necessity, a simple grain of salt, became the flashpoint for a monumental struggle for freedom. For centuries, India, the crown jewel of the British Empire, groaned under the weight of colonial exploitation. Its vast resources, its immense wealth, and even its very spirit were systematically plundered, breeding a deep and festering resentment. But it was the seemingly innocuous salt tax, levied by an imperial power on a substance freely available from India's own seas, that crystallized this widespread oppression into an undeniable insult. This wasn't merely about revenue. It was a symbolic act of control, forcing millions to buy a basic staple made expensive and inaccessible by their foreign rulers. Into this simmering cauldron stepped Mahatma Gandhi, a man whose unique vision of nonviolent resistance would forever alter the course of history. He saw not just a condiment, but a powerful symbol of colonial subjugation, a weapon waiting to be wielded by the common person. This documentary, Salt of the Earth, How India's Salt Tax Ignited a Nation's Fight for Freedom, will journey through the heart of this extraordinary saga. Across 24 compelling sections, we will explore how Gandhi transformed this basic necessity into a potent emblem of defiance and self-reliance, galvanizing an entire nation. Witness the strategic brilliance, the moral courage, and the unwavering spirit that irrevocably shifted the balance of power, leading India towards its destiny of self-rule and inspiring countless movements for justice across the globe. Prepare to see how the humblest of grains can ignite the mightiest of revolutions. For millennia, before the heavy hand of empire reshaped its destiny, India lived in an intimate dance with the earth's bounty. Among its most fundamental treasures, freely given and widely revered, was salt. Not merely a condiment, but a life-giver, a preserver, and a symbol woven deep into the fabric of its diverse cultures. From the sun-drenched coastlines of Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, where vast, shimmering salt pans stretched towards the horizon, to the ancient, landlocked salt lakes like Sambar in Rajasthan, indigenous methods of production flourished. Here, communities had perfected the art of solar evaporation, drawing pristine white crystals from the sea and earth with techniques passed down through countless generations. This was not an industry controlled by distant powers, but a harmonious collaboration between man and nature, sustenance extracted with ancestral wisdom. Salt permeated every aspect of Indian life. In bustling ancient markets, alongside spices and textiles, heaps of crystalline salt were exchanged, a cornerstone of vast trade networks that crisscrossed the subcontinent and beyond. It was essential for preserving food in a land where refrigeration was a distant dream, curing fish, pickling vegetables, ensuring survival through lean seasons. But its significance transcended the purely practical. In Hindu rituals, salt purified, protected, and symbolized loyalty and permanence. New brides would often be presented with salt, signifying prosperity and fidelity. In daily meals, its absence was unthinkable, its presence a sign of life, flavor, and well-being. It bound communities, symbolized hospitality, and was an immutable part of the collective consciousness. Imagine a land where every family could gather their own salt from the seashore, where a farmer could barter it freely, where its abundance was a given, a natural right, inherent and unquestioned. This was India's ancient bond with salt, a relationship of profound respect and fundamental freedom, soon to be shattered by the ambitions of a burgeoning colonial power. Into this ancient, self-sufficient world sailed a new force, driven by ambition and an insatiable hunger for profit. The year is the early 17th century. The British East India Company, initially a humble trading entity, arrived on India's shores, ostensibly seeking spices, textiles, and other exotic goods. Their ships, towering vessels of oak and canvas, docking at bustling ports like Surat, brought with them not just goods, but a nascent ideology of control. What began as a venture in commerce, however, rapidly morphed into an insidious campaign of economic conquest and territorial expansion. Over the next century and a half, The company masterfully exploited the fractured political landscape of the declining Mughal Empire and rival Indian kingdoms. Through cunning diplomacy, military might, and strategic alliances, they systematically dismantled existing economic structures. The pivotal Battle of Plassey in 1757, a deceptive victory for Robert Clive, marked a crucial turning point, granting the company vast revenue-collecting rights, the Diwani, over Bengal. This was no longer just about trade, it was about dominion. They began to establish monopolies, first on lucrative goods like opium and indigo, then gradually extending their reach over virtually every vital resource. Indigenous industries, once thriving, were deliberately suppressed to favor British manufacturers. India, once a global economic powerhouse, was being systematically reduced to a supplier of raw materials and a captive market for British finished goods. This era laid the ruthless groundwork for the British Raj, a period of direct colonial rule where exploitation became an art form. Every policy, every decree, was carefully calibrated to extract maximum wealth from the Indian subcontinent, funneling it back to the coffers in London. The intricate web of local production and trade that had sustained Indian communities for millennia was torn apart, replaced by a centralized, coercive system designed to serve imperial interests. It was in this environment of burgeoning British control and escalating economic subjugation that an unthinkable burden would be placed upon the most basic and vital of necessities, salt. The stage was set for a confrontation over a crystalline substance, but the real battle was for India's soul and its very right to exist freely. As British power solidified, so too did its hunger for revenue. And in salt, they found an astonishingly potent tool. What was once a freely accessible gift of nature became a meticulously controlled, heavily taxed commodity, transforming a basic necessity into a lucrative imperial revenue stream. The imposition of the British salt tax was not a sudden act, but a gradual, deliberate tightening of the colonial grip perfected over decades. Initially, the East India Company asserted control over salt production in Bengal and gradually expanded their monopoly across the subcontinent. After the Crown assumed direct rule following the 1857 rebellion, the policy was formalized and ruthlessly enforced across British India. A draconian legal framework made it illegal for any Indian to produce, collect, or sell salt without explicit British permission. The ancestral salt pans, once symbols of freedom and sustenance, were either destroyed, abandoned, or seized and operated under strict British supervision. Armed guards patrolled coastlines and salt-rich regions, enforcing the new laws with unwavering severity. Perhaps the most audacious aspect of this monopoly was the creation of the Inland Customs Line, often referred to as the Great Hedge of India. For over 2,500 miles, a physical barrier of thorny bushes, stone walls, and ditches, patrolled by thousands of customs officers, snaked across the heart of India. Its purpose, to prevent untaxed salt from entering British-controlled territories. Any salt crossing this line, or produced outside the British system, was contraband, punishable by harsh fines or imprisonment. From the British perspective, the rationale was simple: maximize profit and maintain control. Salt was consumed by every person, regardless of caste, creed, or wealth. A tax on salt was a tax on everyone, ensuring a consistent and immense flow of revenue directly into the imperial coffers. But for millions of Indians, it was an act of profound injustice, a direct assault on their fundamental right to a substance essential for life itself. The free abundance of millennia was replaced by scarcity, control, and exorbitant prices, fueling a slow-burning resentment that would eventually ignite a nation. The abstract concept of a tax on salt manifested itself in the starkest, most brutal reality for the ordinary Indian. What for the British was a mere line item on a ledger became for millions a daily struggle for survival, turning a fundamental human need into an unaffordable luxury. The salt tax disproportionately affected India's poorest citizens, the vast majority of the population. For them, every rupee counted, and the colonial government's insistence on a heavy tax on salt meant a direct blow to their already meager existence. Imagine the daily plight. A farmer in rural Bengal, whose harvest barely fed his family, now faced exorbitant prices for a handful of salt. Without it, his family's health deteriorated, and his ability to preserve food for the lean season was crippled. A laborer in Madras, earning a pittance, would often have to choose between a small portion of food for his children or enough salt to make it palatable and nutritious. Salt was not just for flavor. In a tropical climate without refrigeration, it was vital for food preservation, especially for fish and meat, the primary protein sources for many communities. Its absence led to spoilage, hunger, and widespread nutritional deficiencies, impacting public health across the subcontinent. Malnutrition and related diseases became rampant, particularly among the most vulnerable, women and children. The cruelty of the colonial policy was stark. While the British lived in relative luxury, ordinary Indians faced imprisonment if they dared to gather natural salt from the abundant coastline or the desert earth, resources that had been theirs for millennia. Stories abound of villagers risking harsh penalties, quietly harvesting a few crystals under the cloak of night, only to face the brutal consequences if caught by the omnipresent colonial police. The salt tax symbolized the deepest indignity of British rule, the systematic denial of basic rights, the exploitation of life's essentials for imperial profit, and the stark reminder of India's subjugation. It was a constant, tangible burden, a daily affront that fueled a simmering resentment, waiting for the spark that would ignite it into a national inferno. Even as the salt tax weighed heavily on the common man, the seeds of Indian nationalism were germinating across the vast subcontinent, nourished by a growing multitude of grievances against British rule. The salt tax was but one, albeit potent, symbol of a wider injustice that spurred an intellectual awakening and a burgeoning desire for self-governance. The echoes of discontent began to coalesce into a more organized resistance long before the arrival of a certain Mahatma. The Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, or as many Indians call it, the First War of Indian Independence, served as a violent, bloody precursor. Though brutally suppressed, it ripped open the illusion of British benevolence and cemented a deep-seated mistrust. In its aftermath, a new class of educated Indians emerged, many trained in British institutions, but now turning their intellectual prowess against the colonial system itself. Figures like Dadabhai Naoroji, often called the Grand Old Man of India, meticulously documented the drain of wealth theory, exposing how British policies systematically siphoned India's riches to Britain, leaving India impoverished. These intellectual critiques provided a powerful theoretical basis for the burgeoning nationalist movement. By 1885, this collective awakening led to the formation of the Indian National Congress. Initially, it was a platform for educated Indians to voice moderate demands for greater representation and administrative reforms within the British Empire. Its early leaders, often lawyers and intellectuals, sought dialogue and constitutional means to achieve their objectives. They petitioned, debated, and wrote, laying the intellectual groundwork for a larger struggle. Yet, the simmering resentment over policies like the salt tax, land revenue, and discrimination found resonance in the burgeoning calls for Swaraj, self-rule. Though the path to complete independence was still hazy, the notion of India governing itself was taking root, a powerful idea that would soon be championed by a man whose unique vision would transform these whispers of discontent into a roaring chorus for freedom. As the demand for Swaraj grew louder, India awaited a leader who could unite its disparate voices and guide its struggle. In 1915, a frail, unassuming figure stepped off a ship in Bombay, returning to his homeland after 2 decades abroad. This was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, soon to be revered as Mahatma, great soul, and his arrival would irrevocably alter the course of Indian history. Gandhi's transformative journey had begun far from India's shores, in a crucible of racial discrimination in South Africa. As a young lawyer, He had witnessed firsthand the systemic injustices faced by Indian laborers and merchants under the apartheid regime. It was there, through profound personal experiences and deep philosophical reflection, that he forged his revolutionary philosophy of Satyagraha, truth force or soul force. Satyagraha was not merely passive resistance. It was active, nonviolent civil disobedience, a weapon forged not in steel, but in moral courage and unwavering adherence to truth. It demanded self-suffering rather than inflicting suffering, aiming to convert the oppressor's heart through love and reason, not brute force. In South Africa, Gandhi meticulously tested his principles, organizing protests against discriminatory laws, leading epic marches, enduring imprisonment, and inspiring thousands to defy injustice without resorting to violence. His campaigns against the Black Act, the Natal Indian Congress, and his establishment of self-sufficient communities like Phoenix Settlement and Tolstoy Farm demonstrated the incredible power of collective nonviolent action. He proved that even against overwhelming odds, a morally just struggle, pursued with purity of means, could shake the foundations of oppressive regimes. Returning to an India yearning for liberation, Gandhi brought with him not just a political strategy, but a profound ethical framework, a new way to fight. He understood that India's greatest strength lay not in matching British arms, but in mobilizing the moral force of its millions, transforming the struggle for freedom into a spiritual quest for justice. This unique philosophy would soon find its ultimate expression in challenging the very symbol of colonial exploitation, the salt tax. Upon his return to India, Mahatma Gandhi did not immediately launch a nationwide revolution. Instead, with a sagacity born of his South African experiences, he embarked on a crucial phase of localized campaigns. These experiments with truth, as he called them, were vital in acclimatizing his unique method of satyagraha to the Indian context, building his reputation among the masses, and demonstrating the undeniable effectiveness of nonviolent direct action against specific injustices. His first major intervention came in Champaran, Bihar, in 1917. Indigo farmers were being brutally exploited by British planters, forced to cultivate indigo on a fixed portion of their land, often at ruinous prices. Gandhi immersed himself in their plight, conducting detailed surveys, resisting arrest, and organizing peaceful protests. His resolute non-cooperation and the sheer moral force of his presence compelled the British authorities to conduct an inquiry, leading to significant concessions for the farmers. It was a triumph that showcased the power of organized nonviolence. Soon after, in 1918, he led the Kheda Satyagraha in Gujarat, where peasants, ravaged by crop failure, were demanding remission of land revenue. Again, Gandhi mobilized them to non-cooperate, refusing to pay taxes until their demands were met. The movement, though facing stiff resistance, ultimately forced the government to suspend revenue collection for the poorest farmers. Later that same year, in Ahmedabad, Gandhi employed a fast unto death, a potent satyagraha tool, to support striking textile mill workers demanding better wages. His fast galvanized public opinion and eventually secured an honorable settlement for the workers. These early satyagrahas were more than mere victories. They were a living testament to Gandhi's philosophy. They built his credibility, established him as a leader who genuinely understood and championed the cause of the common people, and demonstrated that nonviolent resistance could indeed challenge and overcome colonial oppression. Each success resonated across India, transforming Gandhi from an unknown lawyer into the undisputed voice of the nation, preparing him and India for the larger, epic-making battles that lay ahead. Building upon the successes of these localized movements, and with Gandhi's influence now reaching every corner of India, the nationalist movement began to articulate a bolder, unequivocal demand. The time for incremental reform, for dominion status within the British Empire, was over. The nation yearned for absolute freedom. This pivotal shift culminated in December 1929 at the historic Lahore session of the Indian National Congress. Under the dynamic leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru, a rising star and Gandhi's chosen successor, the Congress passed the momentous Purna Swaraj Resolution, a declaration of complete independence for British rule. It was a defiant rejection of all compromises, an assertion that India's destiny lay entirely in its own hands. Gathered on the banks of the Ravi River, under a starlit sky, thousands of delegates and nationalists pledged to achieve Purna Swaraj. The resolution declared January 26, 1930, as Purna Swaraj Day, a day for Indians to take a pledge of civil disobedience and reaffirm their commitment to absolute freedom. Though not legally binding, this symbolic declaration electrified the nation, transforming a political ideal into a sacred promise. This wasn't just a political statement. It was a profound psychological break from the colonial past. It was a clear signal to the British that India would no longer settle for anything less than total sovereignty. The Congress now sought not just a place at the table, but ownership of the entire house. The stage was now irrevocably set for direct action, for a decisive confrontation that would put the philosophy of Satyagraha to its ultimate test. And at the heart of this confrontation, chosen by Gandhi himself as the perfect symbol of British oppression and Indian resolve, would be the very commodity that had been a source of both life and servitude for centuries: salt. The declaration of Purna Swaraj was the thunder before the storm, the clarion call that would soon lead millions to march for their birthright. By the late 1920s, India's yearning for Swaraj, or self-rule, had reached a fever pitch. But the path to independence was fraught with challenges. How could one man, armed only with the philosophy of nonviolence, galvanize a vast, diverse subcontinent against the mightiest empire the world had ever known? The British Raj, an unyielding monolith of colonial power, seemed impenetrable. Mahatma Gandhi, however, possessed a unique genius for strategy, understanding the pulse of his nation like no other. He sought not merely political freedom, but a moral awakening, a true independence of spirit. He needed an issue, a symbol, potent enough to resonate with every Indian, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest merchant, transcending the myriad of castes, creeds, and languages. His masterstroke, when it came, was shockingly simple: salt. At first glance, it seemed an almost absurd choice. A basic, everyday commodity, essential for life itself. But in this very simplicity lay its profound power. The British, through the India Salt Act of 1882, had monopolized salt production, prohibited Indians from collecting or selling their own salt, and imposed a heavy tax on it. This wasn't just a revenue stream. It was a symbol of imperial arrogance, an egregious injustice baked into the very fabric of daily life. Gandhi recognized that salt was not a luxury. It was a necessity. Its tax disproportionately burdened the poorest segments of society, those who struggled daily for survival. For them, the salt tax meant a tangible, immediate suffering. Moreover, the British monopoly on salt was a moral affront. To deny a people the right to harvest a substance freely given by nature, particularly when that substance was vital for their health and survival, was an act of profound dehumanization. Gandhi understood that this common grievance would unite Indians across all social strata. It required no complex political education. Everyone understood the injustice of paying for what was rightfully theirs, harvested from their own land and sea. By targeting salt, Gandhi aimed to expose the moral bankruptcy of British rule, making the abstract concept of independence tangible and immediate. It was a brilliant, universally understood grievance, a clear line in the sand that pitted the basic right to sustenance against the oppressive might of an empire. This seemingly humble mineral, extracted from the earth and sea, would become the catalyst for a national awakening, igniting a fight for freedom the world had never witnessed. With salt identified as the symbolic heart of the next great Satyagraha, Mahatma Gandhi meticulously began to plan his audacious challenge to British authority, the Dandi March. This was no spontaneous act, but a carefully choreographed act of defiance, designed to maximize moral impact and global visibility. Every detail was weighed, every potential outcome considered. The destination, The coastal village of Dandi in Gujarat was chosen not just for its proximity to the sea and natural salt deposits, but for its relative obscurity, allowing the act of law-breaking to be pure and unadulterated, far from immediate violent confrontation in a major city. Gandhi's selection of his initial contingent of satyagrahis, or truth force practitioners, was equally strategic. He chose 78 individuals, a diverse group representing various castes and communities, yet unified by their unwavering commitment to nonviolence and the cause of independence. These were not just followers. They were living embodiments of the movement's ideals, their personal sacrifices intended to inspire millions. They underwent rigorous preparation, not just physical training for the grueling 240-mile trek, but also spiritual and ethical training, reinforcing the absolute necessity of nonviolence in the face of anticipated British oppression. Gandhi knew that any act of retaliation from his marchers would undermine the moral high ground he sought to claim. Communication was paramount. Before the march began, Gandhi sent a poignant letter to Viceroy Lord Irwin, outlining his intentions, detailing the injustices of the salt tax, and offering a path for the British to avert the confrontation, a path, he knew, they were unlikely to take. This letter, widely publicized, served as both a moral ultimatum and a global declaration of intent. Through articles in his newspaper, Young India, and tireless public addresses, he explained the purpose of the march to the Indian populace, urging them to prepare for widespread civil disobedience once he broke the law at Dandi. Simultaneously, he ensured that international journalists and observers were aware of his plans, inviting the world to witness the unfolding drama. This careful preparation was not just about logistics. It was about laying the groundwork for a movement that would transform a simple walk into a monumental act of global significance. The dawn of March 12, 1930, broke over Sabarmati Ashram with an almost unbearable weight of expectation. The air was thick with emotion, a potent mix of hope, apprehension, and fervent determination. At 6:30 a.m., precisely as planned, Mahatma Gandhi, then 61 years old, emerged from his ashram, his slight figure clad in a simple white dhoti. Behind him, a disciplined column of 78 chosen satyagrahis, their faces etched with resolve, began their historic 240-mile trek towards the coastal village of Dandi. They were not merely walking. They were marching into the annals of history, carrying the aspirations of a subjugated nation on their shoulders. Thousands had gathered at the ashram gates, lining the dusty roads, their silence punctuated by choked sobs and cries of Mahatma Gandhi ki jai. Victory to Mahatma Gandhi. The farewell was poignant, heavy with the knowledge that many of these marchers, including Gandhi himself, might not return as free men. Yet there was an unmistakable current of defiant hope, a collective belief that this simple act would ignite something profound. The initial steps were slow, deliberate, each stride a public declaration against colonial oppression. Gandhi, leaning on his staff, set a steady pace, his gaze fixed forward, an embodiment of the unyielding will he sought to awaken in his countrymen. From its very inception, the Dandi March captured the imagination of not just India, but the world. Indian newspapers carried breathless accounts, printing daily updates of their progress. International correspondents, intrigued by Gandhi's unique form of nonviolent rebellion, dispatched dispatches that put India's struggle on the front pages of newspapers from London to New York. They recognized the unfolding drama, a David and Goliath struggle, where a seemingly frail man was challenging the might of the British Empire with nothing but moral force. This unprecedented media attention ensured that the British could not suppress the movement in silence. The visual of Gandhi and his followers, walking peacefully but purposefully, resonated deeply. It sparked hope in the hearts and minds of millions across the subcontinent, transforming passive resignation into active anticipation. Every mile covered, every village passed, amplified the message. The fight for freedom had begun, and it was a march for all of India. For 24 arduous days, The Dandi March traversed the dusty plains and verdant fields of Gujarat, a living, breathing testament to resolve. The daily routine was rigorous. They walked approximately 10 miles each day, often starting before dawn to beat the searing Indian sun. Gandhi, despite his age, led the way, setting a formidable pace. The physical hardships were immense: blisters, fatigue, the relentless heat, and the ever-present dust. Yet the marchers endured, their spiritual conviction fueling their physical stamina. What truly defined the journey, however, was the burgeoning public support. As the small column progressed, it swelled into a moving river of humanity. Villagers poured out of their homes, lining the roads, showering the marchers with flowers, offering food, water, and shelter. Many walked for miles with Gandhi before returning to their villages, their hearts ignited. At each stop, Gandhi addressed the gathered crowds, often thousands strong, under the shade of banyan trees or in village squares. His messages were simple, direct, and profoundly impactful. He spoke not just of the unjust salt tax, but of Swaraj, self-rule, and the moral imperative of nonviolence. He urged them to shed their fear, to embrace self-reliance, and to prepare for widespread civil disobedience. He called upon them to spin their own cloth, boycott foreign goods, and unite against oppression. Gandhi's unique ability to connect with the common person was never more evident. He spoke their language, understood their struggles, and offered them a dignified path to liberation. He listened to their grievances, blessed their children, and inspired them with his unwavering faith. The march transformed a small group of devoted followers into a national phenomenon. Each step was a defiant rejection of colonial rule, each speech a beacon of hope. The Dandi March became a moving symbol of a nation awakening, a powerful, living demonstration that freedom was not a gift to be granted, but a right to be claimed through collective, nonviolent action. Thousands along the way were inspired, signing pledges to join the burgeoning civil disobedience movement, ready to follow Gandhi's lead when the moment came to break the law. The Dandi March was far more than a physical journey. It was a masterclass in political theater, a potent act of symbolic resistance orchestrated by Mahatma Gandhi with unparalleled genius. Every single element, from the deliberate choice of salt to the slow, measured pace of the march, was meticulously designed to strip the British Empire of its moral authority and awaken the dormant consciousness of a nation. Gandhi understood that symbols could be more powerful than armies, and a simple walk towards the sea could shake the foundations of an empire. Each of the 240 miles traversed was a deliberate step towards freedom. Each village stop was a carefully chosen stage, where Gandhi transformed a local gathering into a national discourse on justice and self-respect. His addresses were not just speeches. They were sermons of empowerment, delivered in the language of the people, connecting their daily struggles to the larger fight for Swaraj. He challenged the seemingly invincible British with the moral superiority of nonviolence, pitting the spiritual might of India against the material might of the Raj. The act of walking itself became a symbol of quiet defiance, of unyielding resolve, of a people rising to reclaim their destiny. It was a pilgrimage for freedom, observed by all. The image of the frail, elderly Gandhi, leading his disciplined followers, resonated deeply, igniting a national consciousness that transcended regional and religious divides. The salt tax, once a mundane imposition, became the crucible in which a shared national identity was forged. It wasn't about the monetary value of salt. It was about the principle, the inherent right to one's own resources, the dignity of self-determination. By making a universal grievance the focal point, Gandhi unified disparate communities under a common banner. The Dandi March was a living, breathing testament to the power of collective action, a continuous, unfolding narrative that showcased the moral courage of a subjugated people. It demonstrated to both India and the world that the demand for freedom was not merely a political slogan, but an unyielding, deeply held aspiration that would manifest in every step, every word, every act of peaceful defiance. A nation, once resigned to its fate, was now awake, united, and ready to challenge its masters. As the Dandi March progressed across the dusty landscapes of Gujarat, it was not merely an internal Indian affair. It became a global spectacle, playing out on the world stage. Mahatma Gandhi, with his intuitive grasp of public relations, ensured that the eyes of international media were fixed squarely on his audacious protest. He knew that global opinion, particularly in democratic nations, could be a powerful weapon against the British Empire's claim to moral leadership. International journalists flocked to India, drawn by the unique drama unfolding. Among them was the American correspondent Webb Miller, whose vivid dispatches for the United Press International captured the imagination of readers worldwide. Miller's reports provided a raw, unfiltered look at the march, describing the arduous journey, the unwavering resolve of the marchers, and the growing tension as they neared Dandi. His words painted a picture of a peaceful, dignified people challenging an oppressive colonial power, a narrative that resonated deeply in a world grappling with questions of self-determination and human rights. The nonviolent nature of Gandhi's Satyagraha stood in stark contrast to the brutal repression often meted out by colonial authorities elsewhere. This juxtaposition garnered widespread international sympathy for the Indian cause. Newspapers in London, New York, Paris, and Berlin carried daily updates, often featuring compelling photographs of Gandhi and his followers. Political leaders, intellectuals, and human rights advocates from around the globe began to voice their support, condemning the injustices of the salt tax and the broader British rule. The moral pressure on the British government mounted exponentially. How could the supposed champions of democracy justify denying a basic right to millions, especially when that denial was being met with such peaceful, yet resolute, defiance? The Dandi March became a living, breathing indictment of colonial hypocrisy, forcing the world to confront the moral contradictions of the British Empire. This global scrutiny ensured that the subsequent British crackdown, when it inevitably came, would be met with international condemnation, further eroding the legitimacy of their rule and significantly strengthening India's position on the path to independence. After 24 days of relentless marching, 240 miles traversed, and a nation held captive by anticipation, Mahatma Gandhi and his weary but resolute followers reached the coastal village of Dandi on the evening of April 5, 1930. The journey, a powerful testament to endurance and collective will, had culminated at the very edge of the Arabian Sea. The atmosphere was electric, a palpable tension mingling with fervent hope as the sun set on the eve of a pivotal moment. The world watched, breathless, wondering how the greatest empire would react to this unprecedented, non-violent challenge. Then, on the morning of April 6th, as the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, illuminating the tranquil mudflats of Dandi, Mahatma Gandhi rose. He walked purposefully to the water's edge, his frail figure silhouetted against the rising sun. Accompanied by his inner circle, he waded into the shallow waters, then bent down. With a simple, deliberate gesture, he scooped up a lump of saline mud and sea salt crystals from the sand. He held it aloft, a shimmering, defiant symbol against the vastness of the sea and the might of the British Empire. In that singular, understated act, he had symbolically broken the draconian British salt law, declaring open rebellion not with weapons, but with truth and moral courage. The moment was profound. It wasn't about the handful of salt. It was about the principle. It was about reclaiming a fundamental right denied for decades. A ripple went through the crowd of thousands who had gathered to witness this historic event. The tension that had held them captive for weeks burst forth in cries of Mahatma Gandhi Ki Jai. His act was the spark that ignited the flame of nationwide civil disobedience. It was the signal. Within minutes, others followed suit, openly collecting salt, defying the law. British officials, present but hesitant to act violently against Gandhi himself, could only watch as the carefully constructed edifice of their authority began to crumble. The march's ultimate purpose was fulfilled. Gandhi had provided the visual, the moral, and the legal impetus for an entire nation to rise in peaceful protest, unleashing a tide of nonviolent rebellion that would shake the very foundations of the British Raj. Gandhi's simple act at Dandi on April 6, 1930, was more than a symbolic gesture. It was a clarion call that reverberated across every corner of India, unleashing a torrent of unprecedented mass civil disobedience. The nation, poised on the precipice of freedom, erupted in a widespread, nonviolent rebellion that caught the British Raj by surprise and overwhelmed its capacity for control. The Salt Satyagraha had begun, and millions answered its call. From remote villages to bustling cities, Indians defied the salt law with unyielding courage. People openly collected natural salt from the sea and land, even boiling seawater in pots on public streets to produce salt. These illegal batches of salt, though often rough and unrefined, were sold in markets, symbolizing a defiant rejection of British authority. Women, often at the forefront of the movement, played a crucial role, making and selling salt, staging pickets, and challenging colonial norms. The movement rapidly expanded beyond salt. There were widespread hartals, mass strikes and shutdowns, boycotts of foreign cloth, liquor shops, and British goods. Thousands resigned from government jobs, lawyers renounced their practices, and students boycotted schools and colleges. Other unjust laws were openly challenged, transforming the Salt Satyagraha into a comprehensive civil disobedience movement. The British response was swift and brutal, but ultimately ineffective. Police resorted to widespread arrests, lathi charges, baton blows, and even firing on peaceful protesters. Over 60,000 Indians, including almost all the prominent leaders and eventually Gandhi himself, were imprisoned. Jails overflowed. Yet, the nonviolent resistance proved remarkably resilient. Each act of repression seemed only to fuel the movement's fervor, garnering more sympathy and drawing new recruits. The world watched in horror as unarmed protesters faced down armed police with unflinching courage, refusing to retaliate. The iconic Wadala Salt Works raid, where hundreds marched peacefully into a salt pan and were brutally beaten by police, captured by Webb Miller, became a shocking testament to British cruelty and Indian resolve. The British found themselves in an untenable position. Violence only strengthened the moral argument of the Indians, while inaction allowed the movement to fester. Gandhi's strategic gamble had paid off. The nation had risen, and the empire, for the first time, truly felt the ground tremble beneath its feet. As Mahatma Gandhi languished in Yerwada jail, the fire he had ignited refused to be extinguished. Instead, it spread with an even greater, more desperate intensity. The carefully planned raid on the Darasena Salt Works in May 1930 became a horrifying testament to the unwavering resolve of the Satyagrahis and the brutal, unyielding nature of the British Raj. With Gandhi imprisoned, his designated successor, Sarojini Naidu, the Nightingale of India, led over 2,500 peaceful protesters towards the salt pans, fully aware of the danger they faced. What unfolded next was not merely a clash, but a massacre witnessed by the world. American journalist Webb Miller, whose eyewitness account was syndicated globally, described scenes that would forever stain the conscience of the empire. He reported seeing column after column of unarmed volunteers, advancing silently, only to be met by steel-tipped lathis wielded by hundreds of police. The blows rained down mercilessly on heads, shoulders, and legs. Miller recounted how men fell like ninepins, their skulls cracked, bones broken, and bodies convulsing in pain. He wrote, "Not a single one of the volunteers even raised an arm to fend off the blows. They marched, fell, were carried away, and others stepped forward to take their place. It was a chilling, relentless cycle of nonviolent sacrifice against unrestrained brutality. Ambulance workers, struggling to keep pace, ferried away hundreds of injured. Some, barely conscious, were dragged by their arms and legs, leaving trails of blood in the dust. The sheer, deliberate violence, inflicted upon protesters who offered no resistance, exposed the true face of colonial power. Miller's report, published in over 1,350 newspapers worldwide, elicited outrage and condemnation, particularly in the United States and Europe. It was a pivotal moment where the moral high ground unequivocally shifted. The images painted by his words of unarmed Indians facing down the might of an empire with only their bodies and their convictions eroded whatever moral authority Britain still claimed. Dharasana became a global symbol of colonial oppression, accelerating the international pressure on the British government and galvanizing further resistance within India, proving that even in chains, the movement's spirit remained unbroken, demanding a reckoning. The brutality at Dharasana, far from crushing the spirit of the nation, ignited it further, revealing new dimensions of strength within Indian society. Crucially, the Salt Satyagraha witnessed an unprecedented awakening among Indian women, who shattered centuries of social restrictions to stand shoulder to shoulder with men, transforming the very fabric of the independence movement. Previously confined largely to domestic roles, the call to action, framed around a basic necessity like salt, resonated deeply with their understanding of household survival and dignity. Women from all strata of society, rural peasants to urban professionals, educated elites to illiterate laborers, answered Gandhi's summons. They defied stern patriarchal norms and stepped onto the public stage with remarkable courage. They participated actively in protests, picketing shops selling foreign cloth and liquor, often enduring verbal abuse and physical assault from police and unsympathetic onlookers. They cooked and distributed food for protesters, nursed the injured, and even carried messages through police cordons. Many, like Kamladevi Chattopadhyay, led their own processions, bravely confronting authorities and facing imprisonment. They meticulously collected natural salt from the shores, symbolically breaking the oppressive law, often in plain view of police, their actions becoming powerful, visible acts of defiance. This mass participation profoundly changed the dynamics of the movement. Their presence, often draped in traditional saris, lent a unique moral authority to the protests, making it even harder for the British to justify their brutal tactics. It wasn't just men challenging the empire. It was the mothers, sisters, and daughters of India demanding their rightful place. Beyond challenging colonial rule, their activism initiated a seismic shift within Indian society itself. Women's public role was irrevocably altered, their voices amplified, their capabilities recognized. The Salt Satyagraha became a crucible for women's empowerment, laying the groundwork for their future involvement in politics and social reform, asserting their claim to both national freedom and personal liberation. Their courage became an indelible part of the nation's fight, proving that true freedom could only be achieved when all its people, regardless of gender, stood united and fearless. The widespread civil disobedience, fueled by the sacrifices at Dharasana and the unprecedented participation of women, began to inflict significant and undeniable damage on the British Raj. It wasn't just a moral crisis. It was becoming an administrative and economic nightmare. Gandhi's strategy of nonviolent non-cooperation proved to be a far more insidious and effective weapon than any armed rebellion, silently eroding the foundations of colonial power. The most immediate and tangible impact was on the very revenue stream that sparked the movement, salt tax. As millions either produced their own salt or purchased illegally made salt, the government's revenue from the salt monopoly plummeted dramatically. This was compounded by widespread boycotts of British goods, particularly textiles, which severely hurt British businesses operating in India. Shopkeepers refused to sell imported cloth, and consumers patriotically opted for homespun khadi, dealing a direct blow to Manchester mills and British commercial interests. Pickets outside shops and factories ensured compliance, creating an atmosphere of economic non-cooperation that extended far beyond salt. Simultaneously, the legal and prison systems buckled under the sheer weight of defiance. Tens of thousands of satyagrahis were arrested for various acts of civil disobedience, from making salt to picketing. Jails across India became severely overcrowded, stretching resources to breaking point. Courts were overwhelmed, struggling to process the flood of cases. The administrative machinery of the Raj, designed to maintain order and extract resources, found itself consumed by the Sisyphean task of containing a non-violent rebellion of millions. This widespread non-cooperation paralyzed governance in many regions, demonstrating in no uncertain terms that even without violence, a determined populace could render an occupying power ineffective. The economic losses, the administrative paralysis, and the immense logistical challenges of governing a recalcitrant nation forced the British to confront a stark reality. Continued brute force alone was unsustainable and counterproductive. The empire, for all its military might, was proving vulnerable to the power of a united, nonviolent will. The Salt Satyagraha had created not just a moral fissure, but a deep, practical crack in the edifice of British rule, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in strategy from London. The cumulative pressure, the global condemnation of British brutality, the unwavering resolve of the Satyagrahis, and the severe administrative and economic strain eventually forced the hand of the British government. After nearly a year of intense struggle, with thousands imprisoned and the machinery of the Raj faltering, Lord Irwin, the Viceroy of India, extended an invitation to Mahatma Gandhi for negotiations. It was an unprecedented move. The leader of a mass civil disobedience movement, just released from prison, sitting across the table from the highest representative of the British Empire. The result was the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, signed on March 5, 1931. This landmark agreement marked a crucial, if temporary, truce in the battle for Indian independence. Under its terms, the civil disobedience movement was suspended. In exchange, the British government agreed to release all political prisoners not convicted of violence, permit the collection and manufacture of salt for personal use along the coast, and allow peaceful picketing of liquor and foreign cloth shops. Crucially, the British also agreed to Gandhi's participation in the Second Round Table Conference in London, where the future of India's constitutional reforms would be discussed. For Gandhi and the Indian National Congress, the pact was a strategic pause, a moment to regroup and demonstrate their willingness to negotiate, even while retaining the option of resuming civil disobedience if negotiations failed. It was not a concession of independence, but a recognition of the movement's power. For the British, it was an attempt to restore order, placate international opinion, and bring the Indian National Congress into the formal political process, hoping to diffuse the revolutionary fervor. The pact highlighted Gandhi's exceptional negotiating skills and solidified his position as the undisputed leader and voice of India's aspirations. While some within the Congress viewed the concessions as insufficient, particularly regarding the death sentences of Bhagat Singh and his comrades, the pact undoubtedly gave the Indian independence movement a new legitimacy on the international stage. It demonstrated that even a powerful empire could be brought to the negotiating table by the sheer force of nonviolent collective action, proving that the Salt Satyagraha was not merely a protest, but a potent political weapon capable of forcing meaningful dialogue. The Gandhi-Irwin Pact represented a moment of respite, but the true and lasting victory of the Salt Satyagraha extended far beyond any temporary agreement. This single, focused act of defiance profoundly impacted India's independence movement, leaving an indelible legacy that shaped the nation's future. It was a catalyst that boosted national morale to unprecedented heights, demonstrating the tangible power of collective action against a seemingly invincible empire. Perhaps its most significant contribution was the way it united diverse communities across India. The simplicity of salt as an issue cut across religious, caste, and regional divides. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, untouchables, and upper castes all joined hands, recognizing a common oppressor and a shared aspiration for Swaraj, or self-rule. It transformed a series of localized protests into a truly national awakening, fostering a sense of shared identity and purpose that had often been elusive. Gandhi's genius lay in his ability to mobilize the masses around an issue that affected every single Indian, making the fight for freedom deeply personal and universally accessible. The Satyagraha also firmly established nonviolence, or ahimsa, as a powerful and effective political tool on a global stage. It wasn't just a moral philosophy. It was a practical strategy that could challenge the might of an empire. The images of unarmed protesters enduring brutal beatings without retaliation resonated deeply, exposing the moral bankruptcy of colonial rule and proving that courage lay not in inflicting violence, but in enduring it with dignity. This moral authority, coupled with the economic and administrative disruption, solidified Gandhi's leadership, cementing his status as the Mahatma, the great soul, whose unique vision could lead a nation to freedom. In essence, the Salt Satyagraha was a transformative moment. It was more than a march. It was a national education in resistance, an exercise in mass mobilization, and a profound assertion of dignity. It accelerated the path to freedom by proving that Indians were not merely subjects, but citizens capable of self-governance, igniting a flame of hope that would ultimately consume the colonial darkness and illuminate the path to an independent India. Beyond its immediate political and economic ramifications, the salt tax and the Satyagraha it inspired transcended a mere protest. They transformed salt into a profound and enduring metaphor for India's struggle for self-determination. Salt, a common, essential commodity, became a powerful symbol not just of colonial injustice, but of the deeper yearning for fundamental human rights, dignity, and control over one's own destiny. For centuries, salt had been freely available to the people of India, harvested from their own lands and seas. The British tax transformed this basic necessity of life, vital for health, for preserving food, for sustaining families, into a symbol of alien control and economic exploitation. It was a stark reminder that even the simplest elements of their existence were subject to the whims of a foreign power. To make or possess salt without paying the tax was not merely breaking a law. It was an act of reclaiming what was intrinsically theirs, a declaration of sovereignty over their own resources and their very livelihoods. Gandhi, with his unparalleled understanding of symbolism, recognized that this humble white crystal could embody the entire spectrum of India's grievances. When he picked up that lump of salty mud on the beach at Dandi, he was not just defying an unjust law. He was symbolically picking up the fragments of India's lost dignity, its suppressed economy, and its stolen self-respect. He was asserting that freedom began with the right to control one's own basic necessities, that true independence meant sovereignty over every aspect of life, from governance to the very food on one's plate. The Salt Satyagraha thus became a testament to the belief that human dignity is non-negotiable, and that the right to live free from exploitation is paramount. It elevated a mundane item into a potent emblem of national pride and resistance, teaching a generation that freedom wasn't an abstract political ideal, but a tangible, essential right, as fundamental and vital as salt itself. This metaphor resonated deeply, transforming the fight for independence into a universal struggle for the right to self-determination, for the control over one's resources, and for the inherent dignity of all people. The ripples of the Salt Satyagraha extended far beyond the shores of India, inspiring future leaders and movements for civil rights and freedom across the globe. Gandhi's audacious strategy of confronting imperial power with a moral force of nonviolence, articulated so powerfully during the Dandi March, provided a revolutionary blueprint for change that transcended geographical and cultural boundaries. The success and moral clarity of the Indian independence movement, largely fueled by the Salt Satyagraha, became a beacon for oppressed peoples everywhere. One of the most prominent inheritors of Gandhi's philosophy was Martin Luther King Jr., who openly acknowledged his profound debt to the Mahatma. King studied Gandhi's writings extensively, particularly his principles of Satyagraha, and adapted them to the American civil rights movement. The boycotts, peaceful marches, sit-ins, and the unwavering commitment to nonviolence in the face of brutal opposition by King and his followers bore striking resemblances to the tactics employed during the Salt March and the wider Indian independence struggle. The image of protesters enduring police dogs and water cannons with dignity, much like the Satyagrahis at Dharasana, profoundly shifted public opinion and exposed the moral failings of segregation. Similarly, in South Africa, where Gandhi himself had first forged his Satyagraha philosophy, Nelson Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement drew profound lessons from India's experience. While the ANC eventually adopted armed struggle as a last resort, the decades of nonviolent resistance that preceded it were deeply rooted in Gandhian principles. The defiance campaigns, the mass protests, and the moral stand against an unjust system all echoed the spirit of Dandi. Mandela, after his release, often spoke of Gandhi's enduring influence on his own thinking about justice and liberation. The Salt Satyagraha demonstrated that nonviolent resistance was not a sign of weakness, but a powerful, morally unassailable force capable of dismantling even the most entrenched systems of oppression. It offered a universal language of resistance, proving the united people, armed with conviction and dignity, could bring about monumental change. The echoes of Dandi continue to inspire activists and freedom fighters today, a testament to its timeless and universal legacy of justice and peaceful protest. While the Salt Satyagraha was a crucial, transformative turning point, galvanizing a nation and inspiring the world, it was not the final chapter in India's arduous journey to independence. The Dandi March and the subsequent civil disobedience movement lit an unquenchable flame, but the path to freedom was protracted, fraught with further struggles, complex political negotiations, and immense sacrifices that stretched for another 17 years. The Gandhi-Irwin Pact, a strategic pause, ultimately failed to yield a permanent solution at the Round Table conferences, leading to a resurgence of civil disobedience, albeit on a smaller scale. The Second World War brought new complexities, as Britain, embroiled in its own global conflict, sought India's support while still denying its full freedom. This led to the Quit India movement in 1942, a defiant call for immediate British withdrawal, which saw widespread protests, strikes, and acts of sabotage across the country, met with severe repression and the imprisonment of key leaders, including Gandhi himself. Post-war, with Britain economically exhausted and under international pressure, the negotiations for transfer of power gained irreversible momentum. However, the joy of impending freedom was tragically tempered by the growing communal tensions between Hindus and Muslims, ultimately leading to the painful and violent partition of India in 1947. This division, born of political complexities and communal strife, created two new nations, India and Pakistan, leaving behind a legacy of unresolved issues and profound human suffering. On August 15, 1947, India finally achieved its cherished independence. It was a moment of unparalleled joy and profound sorrow, a culmination of decades of tireless struggle, nonviolent resistance, and the sacrifices of countless individuals. The Salt Satyagraha, born from a simple commodity, had forged the moral backbone of a nation, teaching it to stand tall against oppression. It proved that the salt of the earth, its people, held the power to dissolve the chains of empire. While the subsequent road was long and difficult, the Dandi March remains an enduring testament to the power of human spirit and a critical foundational stone in the architecture of India's freedom, forever etched in the annals of history as a triumph of conscience over might. From the boundless oceans of India, a simple white crystal emerged, not just as a flavouring, but as the unlikely spark that ignited a nation's relentless pursuit of independence. Stripped of its freedom and taxed by a foreign hand, salt became more than a commodity. It became the ultimate symbol of colonial injustice and a universal cry for human dignity. It was Mahatma Gandhi's unparalleled genius to identify this humble grain as the common thread binding every Indian, transforming passive resentment into an active, moral resistance. The Dandi March was more than a trek. It was a pilgrimage of defiance, a visual manifesto of nonviolent power that resonated across continents. Witnessing millions rise to reclaim their right to salt was to witness a paradigm shift, a testament to the power of collective will against an entrenched empire. The Salt Satyagraha's reverberations echoed far beyond India's shores, inspiring countless struggles for justice and civil rights, proving that moral strength can indeed overcome brute force. Today, the legacy of salt endures, reminding us that freedom is not merely won on battlefields, but often in the quiet, resolute acts of ordinary people challenging injustice. It stands as a timeless symbol of self-determination, the unyielding spirit of a people determined to be free, and the enduring power of a single grain to change the world.